Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 One Sustainability Conference, our annual global sustainability event. We now have the pleasure to welcome Filip Elland, Chief Sustainability Officer at Castellum at One Sustainability. Filip will tell us more about preparing for carbon neutral by 2030, the roadmap of a sustainable property company. Filip, thank you, and welcome to One Sustainability.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Okay. So my name is Filip Elland and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Castellum. And I've been with the company for quite some time. I've been with the company for 11 years and I've been working with I would say sustainability has always been a big part of my role, but I've also been working with property management, property development, process management. But as said, always with a sustainability focus. And since 2016, I've been in this role, managing the sustainability department and sustainability strategy at Castellum. And I'm a civil engineer, that's my background. So I have a technical point of view into sustainability. And I guess there are different ways into working in this industry. But I like numbers, I like data, and I like the technical side of it. I think that's a big part of the transition to a more sustainable society in general. So yeah, that's me on this slide. And Castellum, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Castellum, but we are at the moment the largest listed commercial real estate company in the Nordic market. So mainly we're represented in Sweden, but also in Denmark, in Finland, and also in Norway through our ownership of 33% of the stocks in Entra, a major listed real estate company in Norway. But from a property management perspective, more than 90% of our assets are located in Sweden. So our exposure is in AAA rated countries from an economic perspective. So as of today, it's approximately 6.3 million square meters of lettable space. And if you translate to dollar, approximately $18 billion worth of assets under management. And Castellum, we have had quite a major or huge focus on ESG for many years. And I will come back to this and I will show you our agenda when it comes to our transition and our plan for taking the next step and hopefully also change the industry. But we have set up a pretty strong target to become carbon neutral by 2030. So we are aiming to be there 20 years ahead of Paris, the Paris Agreement. And we are also at the moment the only listed real estate company in the Nordic market to be listed on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So that's about it for Castellum. We were founded back in '93. We came from the property crisis in the 90s. But of course, a lot of things have changed during those years. And we are listed on Nasdaq Stockholm, the large cap list in Sweden. So during the last couple of years, there have been quite some changes in our portfolio. We just go back last year, we made a major acquisition and grew approximately by 40% during the last year. So we have worked quite a lot this year with integration. But looking at the ESG perspective, we are at the moment for 6 consecutive years the global sector leader in GRESB, or corrected, as of yesterday, actually for 7 consecutive years, since we were also listed this year as a global sector leader in GRESB. And we also have the highest, we are in top 3 in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index by S&P, and we are also since a few weeks back, also listed as a green equity company on Nasdaq. So I actually were in New York just a few weeks ago and got to ring the bell and start the stock market when we were one of the first major companies to actually be listed as a green stock. So it was quite a happening and a confirmation that our sustainability operations is in the front. So our aim, Castellum's aim, is to be the leading and most sustainable commercial property company in the European market. So what that means and what we do, I will come back to that. But it's also about influencing the market and trying to change the industries around us. Because, for example, when it comes to our carbon transition target to reach net zero by 2030, we have to work with suppliers that can get us there. So how can we purchase non-fossil energy for our whole portfolio? How can we use materials when we refurbish and construct new buildings without any carbon footprint, for example? And how can we make circular material the majority usage of materials in the long run? So looking at the challenges for the industry and what we are trying to change and what we are trying to influence. So many of you are probably familiar with these data that you can see on this slide. And if you follow the risk session at that is launched by the world leaders every year, you can see that climate change has been listed as the most urgent and severe risk that we face as humanity, and also as and from an economic perspective. It has been listed for, I think it's 7 or 8 years now that it has been listed as the most urgent risk. And looking at this from a building perspective and for the build sector, 39% of the global energy-related emissions come from buildings. And the risk session that I mentioned before is, of course, the World Economic Forum and their risk session that you can follow each year when they list the major risks for humanity and for the economy. And looking also ahead, we have a growing population, even if it's declining in some countries, it's still growing. There is a demand for more energy, 50% more energy and 100% more space if you look up to 2050. And looking at the materials used in buildings, 50% of all worldwide materials produced goes into buildings. And from a national perspective, and this also I would say translates to the market in US, 60% of the total emissions from this industry comes from construction and materials. But what you mainly see, and when you think of buildings, is usually, okay, you look at energy consumption and how you lower that and how you make it more efficient and what energy you use. But the main challenge ahead is material. But also looking at this from, there is a big energy crisis in Europe, and I would say it has, of course, international effects. There is also a need for more renewable electricity and renewable energy in general. And building, if you look back, the buildings are more of a passive user of energy. But we have set up an energy strategy to also be actively contributing to the national grid. So buildings in the long run, maybe they can store energy, and maybe we can, when everyone needs electricity, for example, now in the morning, we can go down in electricity usage with our batteries. And then so we contribute to the grid. And then when there is not that much demand, maybe we can fill up our batteries. That is something that we are working on right now. We have set up 10 different pilots throughout our portfolio where we work with energy storage to actually contribute to national grid. And also, of course, this is has a very good business case, at least in Sweden, where this market has just a few years has been set up. So it's possible to actually invest in this. From a national perspective in Sweden, just to give you a hint, there is the growing need for electricity, and this also links to international perspective. With the growing need for electricity due to the transition in Sweden, there are 200 to 900 hours per year where we will have no electricity if we continue as business as usual. So we need a lot of more electricity production, but also storage when the production of electricity is low. So the flexibility market has to grow as well as the production side. So these are some of the major challenges that we face and that we have to think of in the long run to actually stay relevant and still be a leading company. And over to our strategy. Castellum have set up a strategy for the sustainable city, as we call it. And we aspire to be the most sustainable real estate company in Europe. And in this strategy, we have 4 focus areas. We have the planet, where we focus on how we responsible and efficiently use resources, and how we lower our carbon footprints that cause global warming. And the second focus area is future-proofing. It's more about how we work with our properties to make them more sustainable, and still focus on the word more sustainable. There is no sustainable building yet in the world. So how we try and change and transform our assets. The third focus area is well-being, and this is a very important area. We spend more than 90% of our time indoors. Castellum have been working with WELL certification for many years. We were one of the first in the world to actually implement WELL certification in our portfolio. Since a few years back, we also transitioned into the WELL portfolio program. We also focus on the last area is social responsibility, and that is how we conduct our business throughout our organization. So it's about health and safety. We don't want any damages of people when we construct a new building, for example. It's also about how we do business from an ethical point of view. So this is the 4 different focus areas. And if you look on this slide, you find some of our targets or the summary of all of them, actually. And I will not have the time to go through each and every one of them, because then I will take up the rest of this session and probably the next one. But of course, you can find my slides afterwards, and you can also look at the review if you want to look at this more closely, or in our annual report for that matter. So we have different targets, and I will mention some of them. The target to 2030 you've seen. Our aim is to be carbon neutral by 2030. And to actually get us there, we have developed 2 roadmaps. So one for property management. That is how we work with our existing assets. So how we, for example, reduce our electricity consumption, energy consumption in general, and also how we work with renewable energy, and also, of course, our company cars and so on. And then we have the roadmap for our property development, which is the major challenge. And I will just show you some data on that so you actually grasp it. This is how we set up demands for our developments. So right now there are demands on all of our major developments that they have to reach at least 15% carbon reduction. By next year, it's 30% reduction from that is calculated with a reference of a reference building that is also calculated. So you actually compare the right type of building with what you construct. Then we also have, if you look at the 2025 targets, we have set up a major solar program. It started just 2 years ago, actually. We have an aim to construct 100 major solar installations by 2025. We actually just finished the number 71 of them. So this is accelerating and have accelerated very fast. And looking ahead with the high electricity prices that we have today in Europe, this will grow extremely fast is our what we see ahead. Yes, and to the developments, for example, there are other targets that we used, reused materials in all of our developments, for example, but there are also targets on gender equality, sick leave. There is a zero aim at injuries and work-related illness, for example. So these are just some of the targets that I can show you more of later. So looking at what we have done over the last couple of years. So this is the energy intensity for Castellum's portfolio. This is heating, electricity, and cooling, looking over a longer time period. So right now we are at an energy intensity of 92 kilowatt hours per square meter year. This is 41% lower than the average building in Sweden. So we have quite an efficient portfolio. But as you can see, there are some bumps during the years. It's when we, for example, in 2016, made an acquisition of a big portfolio. And in 2021, we made another big acquisition, as I mentioned just before. But we have a good trend running here, and this is something that we will continue on. And the ambition for 2030 is that the whole portfolio will have an energy intensity of 50 kilowatt hours per square meter year to aim at the definition of a net zero energy building. And moving ahead, you can see the sustainability certifications growing in our portfolio. So right now, we, as of last year, we are at 48% of the portfolio that is certified according to SPACE. But then, of course, if you look at it from a value perspective, it's more than 60%. And this will continue to grow. And if you look for next year, what we have in the pipeline, we'll probably reach our target of 50% sustainability certifications. So we are already working on the next step in this direction. And here are some also of the solar installations that you can see that is growing, and it's growing very fast right now. And then over to the carbon footprint. This is where it gets quite interesting. So this is the scope 1 and 2 emissions for Castellum's portfolio. And as you can see, we have reduced our carbon intensity quite a lot. I'm sorry for the Swedish language in this slide, but this is kilogram carbon emissions per square meter. So approximately we are down to below 2 kilograms per square meter year in emissions from our property management. And this is, of course, due to our energy intensity being reduced. It's about our transition to more renewable electricity and heating in our portfolio, but also from refrigerants being changed, and our company cars that has been transformed into 100% electric cars. In our company. But what's interesting, I mentioned some data just before to the challenges. You can see that our carbon emissions from looking at when you add on our scope 3 emissions, you can see that the scope 1 and 2 emissions account for a so small portion of the total emissions. 2017 was the first year where we started to mention or started to calculate and measure all of our emissions in scope 3 according to the greenhouse gas protocol. So this is all of the categories in scope 3 when we add that up. And for 2021, there is a huge bump down, and that is more or less only because before 2021, there was no data for Sweden. So we had to use European averages for example, construction in our company. So the 2021 figure is more or less accurate. But in our case, more than 90% of our emission comes from scope 3, and the majority of that comes from construction, so materials usage, and from the construction phase of new buildings and refurbishments. So this is actually pinpointing the problem from this industry and what we face going ahead. We have to change our focus and not just focus on electricity and energy, but we also have to focus a lot, or the majority of our focus should go to materials and the construction phase and how we develop our buildings going ahead, especially since we are still growing and the demand for new space is still huge. So looking at buildings going forward, these are some of the measures that we see in our market right now that is being set up for buildings, let's say the in-use buildings. We have quite a high grade of fossil-free electricity and heating in Sweden, so that is also why our scope 1 and 2 emissions are so small compared to the scope 3 emissions. But as said, approximately 50% of the emissions from a property company in US comes from the development phase. So it's not that far from our market. And we have to go from, as I mentioned, passive usage of energy to actively contributing to the national grid. That is something that we have to work on as a property owner, because there are a need for that going ahead. And of course, how we work with buildings and how we manage buildings going ahead. There are AI that are being developed to automatically optimize buildings, for example. So a lot of that is also in focus going ahead. But generally, climate action is in focus. And this is one example that we just finished. So this is still an illustration in this slide, but this building is actually finished. It's the first net zero carbon emission building that has been constructed in the Nordic market, and the first police department building that has reached a net zero carbon certification in the world. And in this asset, we have reduced emissions by approximately 40% compared to a reference building. So this is quite an interesting building. And when I looked at the first illustrations that I saw of this building, we were far from there. It's a wooden construction, but what we actually done in this building is that we have reduced the materials needed. So we have slimmed the design. We have worked with reduced materials. We have worked with reduced steel in the construction. We worked with concrete that is less carbon intense, for example. We worked with our window designers to actually implement some reduced window materials in this development. So what can we do to actually construct with zero emissions in the future? This is the challenge, and this is the challenge that I give to you, and hopefully maybe you can come back to me with some answers in the future. We have to go from linear usage of materials to actually work with circular use of materials. So a lot more reused materials will have to go into the design, and the new materials that are implemented in the design must have a loop back to a circular loop. We have to reduce the need for material in general. We have to work with slimming the design. If we refurbish or redevelop a building, we have to maybe save the frame of the building, because that is the majority of the emission. And in the long run, we also have to focus on carbon capture techniques and storage. And also in what we see is, of course, climate compensation also have to go into this going ahead. But that is not something that we have in focus right now. Maybe that is something that we will work with in 2026, 2027, when that market is more stable, I would say, and actually maybe work better. So what we are focusing on is the left side of the what you see on the illustration below, working with actually implementing measures in our developments. So reduced materials, lower the less use of materials that is carbon intense, for example. And also, of course, set up production of electricity through solar panels and electricity storage in our buildings. So that is that for me. And hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you very much for having me.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Philip. We do have a question from one of our participants. His name is William Russell. I'm going to read his questions, and we have a few minutes. If you could address his question, would be wonderful. So do you see any difference between tracking energy intensity versus GHG emissions intensity?
So when we look at scope 1 and 2, most of the emissions from that is, of course, come from electricity, and then you have the emission factor for energy that links to that. But then looking into scope 3, that's when it becomes tricky, because not everything can be measured that accurate as scope 1 and 2 today. Much of the scope 3 emissions are still calculated by spend based, so it's based on how much we spend, for example, in a small development, and then there is an emission factor from that industry. But in the long run, that will also be accurate data, so actually data from an LCA for that development. So there are challenges going ahead for the emission that is calculated, comparing with the electricity and heating and cooling that we have worked with for so many years, and have quite worked up a strategy and a knowledge on how to measure and how to calculate the emissions from that.
Thank you very much, and thanks for joining One Sustainability event. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.